Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Mind Games podcast, where each episode we piece together the puzzle that is mental health with a bit of stuff in between. So this is real talk from two very real people. I am Thomas Wellburn, chronic health warrior and multimedia extraordinaire. Joining me on this inner path of discovery is my co-presenter, the grey beard to my dove akin, and the master of positivity, Chris Allan, occupational health advisor, mental health first aid instructor, and all-round great guy. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing really well, thank you. It's Greybeard, Lord of the Rings reference.
I had a feeling that you were not going to get this.
No, what is Dobakin? Dobakin? What is that?
I gave you a Skyrim reference and you didn't even... You're playing it at the moment.
I am launched into Skyrim, but I've neglected that because of the football. And other things that got in the way. But I'm sure all will be revealed.
Oh yeah, that's not it. It's not a spoiler. It's a we're talking about on WhatsApp, Ellie. It's a breadcrumb. It's a breadcrumb.
I like bread.
Yeah, you'll understand, and then when you get it, you'll be like, that's a great reference.
Cool. Thank you. Awesome.
Well, I hope you do anyway. You know, it took me hours to think of that.
Okay. I sincerely apologize for not playing enough video games. I'll get right on it.
Yeah, you're going to have to get to that section. I'm not going to say it again because hopefully you've forgotten about it. So then when it does happen, it's like, whoa, massive shock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Tom. But other than that, I'm absolutely fine. Thank you. I'm enjoying the football. I don't really watch club football, but I love international, especially knockout tournaments. I love knockout tournaments. And yeah, that's it really. Yeah, just getting on with work and that.
Shout out to England.
I know.
Maybe.
I know. Remarkable performance, wasn't it?
It was, especially after their lackluster one against Scotland, which was left a bit of a bitter taste. But, you know, they got the ball to the right people in this one.
Yeah.
And yeah. They weren't really, you know, people like Harry Kane and stuff weren't really getting it in the Scotland game. And I think that's what held them back a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. As a Scotsman in England, I can appreciate good performances from both sides. And I appreciate the latest England performance against Germany. I always think I've been watching them for years, so I always think they play to the level of their opponents. And in terms of Germany, they were just a bit ahead of them. By no means a football expert, though. Please don't paint me. Don't get misunderstood. I don't follow football, but that's my reflections.
Pickford had some good saves as well. I thought he was really good.
Yeah, my son absolutely loves Pickford and thinks he's a fantastic goalie. So yeah, I agree. I'm all in on Pickford as well. I think he did great. And the commentators were saying he's overcome some of his own sort of performance-related mental challenges, not mental health, but...
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting thing to think about in terms of mental health or mental performance and how it affects your physical performance and your competitive performance. Because I've read some books about stuff like that, especially with regard to MMA. That's always been like my sport that I'm most passionate about. And so there's a really good book called The Fighter's Mind. And my friend, shout out to Alan Witten, is a combat sports performance coach and therapist. So We'll have him on one day, no doubt. Shout out to Alan.
Yeah, hopefully he's listening right now. And a nice little tidbit that you're Scottish, because I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I was born in Glasgow many moons ago, but grew up a lot in England. Still very connected to my Scottish roots, though.
Wow. I'll leave the Scottish independence thing just kind of floating, because I'm sure you don't want to comment on that. Okay, so let's move into the discussion, shall we? We have 3 topics this week, and we're going to shoot into it now. So we'll see you over there in a minute.
Discussion.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. We're in the discussion now, and we've got 3 topics today that we're going to go over. Obviously, the big one, the first one, is that it has been, as we're recording this now, Men's Health Week. And I think there's a few things to say on that. I'm going to let Chris start off because obviously this is his forte. I'm sure he's got a few things to fire off. But yeah, Go on, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think the thing that's getting the most attention now, which is great, is the spectre of men's mental health, and most particularly about suicide. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's getting a lot of airtime and a lot of coverage, which is good because
it is good.
As you've told me with the stats, it's a lot higher.
Well, it is, yeah. And I mean, thanks for bringing that into the equation. It's actually 3 times as many men as women die by suicide. There's a specific age bracket as well, which is 40 to 50 years old. It's got the highest rates of suicide in the UK. So there's something happening to our men as they move through from 40 to 50 years old, whereby the risk is elevated. If you look at things like the satisfaction surveys that the government put out, you find that men have a lower subjective rate of life satisfaction than women as well. That's like a national well-being survey. So that's a snapshot of how everyone's feeling, really. The additional problem, I suppose, within this equation is that men are much less likely to go and engage with psychological therapies, talk to their GP about these sort of things. And so we find ourselves with a bit of an equation, a bit of a problem that we've got to try and solve. It's 36, around about 35% of referrals to talking therapies are for men. And I would like to see that adjusted to like 50%,
I think it's interesting, and I don't know if you can comment on why this is, that this occurrence of suicide rates in men seems to mainly be in that 40 to 49 bracket, like that middle age, kind of just surpassing middle age, and that seems to be where it spikes. Why do you think that is, Chris? I mean, I assume midlife crisis is something that's thrown around a lot, and it seems to be something that men tend to go through. Not necessarily all men, but there is kind of something that maybe ties in there. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think the points you make are entirely legitimate. If we think about nowadays, the point of view of where a man is at the age of 40 to 50, it is a bit transitionary. You're kind of leaving your youth behind. Your work is potentially becoming much more of a feature of your life, and the pressures of it, leadership roles, maybe pressures otherwise include things like the traditional gender roles of being the breadwinner. And we have things like financial crisis seemingly on the regular now, pays not being sort of increased regularly in line with inflation. So add to the equation things like financial strains and stresses. I think that's a part of the picture, but I'm not sure it's so well fully understood. Have you got any point of view yourself on that?
I think the breadwinner thing is definitely valid. I think that there is probably a lot of, especially if you're quite career focused, and obviously men still have somewhat of a stereotype, like you say, where they have to be the breadwinner. So say that you get to that middle age point and you haven't reached your point in the career ladder where you want to be, that might feel a bit emasculating for the average man. They might not feel happy with that, and that could make them depressed and definitely make them feel that they haven't done as well in their life as they hoped. And it could lead to suicidal thoughts and even suicide. And I think that's probably more of a problem, like I said, for people who are very career orientated. So I don't know if it's applicable to all men, but I think I could see, I don't want to say that I could see myself being like that at 40 to 49, because I don't think I have that mindset. But if you're someone who's very career orientated, as I am, I can see how if you set yourself a goal and you don't reach it and you're hitting middle age and, like you say, you're leaving your youth behind, I could see how that would be maybe a mental health challenge that you have to overcome. Not necessarily leading to suicide, but it would be a challenge.
Hmm. One thing that I think is interesting in what you said was thoughts of suicide and completion of suicide, or something along those lines. And there is a stark difference between the two. When we look at the numbers and the figures, and when I'm talking to people in a clinical context, thoughts of suicide are a lot more common than many of us would probably care to admit. Much more common than suicide attempts. So among the general population, and this is men and women, about 20% of people admit to having suicidal thoughts. Now, when we're thinking about these sort of statistics, of course, we've got to build into the argument that 20% of people admit or answered yes to a questionnaire online or something along these lines. But if we continue with this and we accept that 20% is a legit number, then the follow-up is that about 6% of people admit to having attempted suicide and 7% of people have admitted to engage in self-harm. So there is a bit of a difference there between prevalence of thoughts and actions. And we need to recognize that, because not just when we talk about thoughts of suicide, it is a clear and present risk. There is most definitely something that requires further assistance, but there's a bit of a risk assessment that's required as well. And if someone is talking to you about their suicidal thoughts, we see hope as a door for us to walk through that can be therapeutic, that can be helpful, and anyone can talk about it with another person. I'm reminded of something that happened last week. Dappy, the rapper, helped someone who was feeling suicidal on the bridge. I mean, that was a fairly high risk circumstance. More than just a thought, there was an intention in the equation. You don't have to be trained professional in order to engage with these conversations. A lot of people get worried about saying the wrong thing. And what I'm trying to say is let's normalize it, because it is fairly common. 20% of people in the UK admit to having had suicidal thoughts. I would suggest that the real number's a bit higher. I don't know what you think. I think 20% of people admit to it, are open about it on a questionnaire, a survey in the street, or however the government has gathered these figures. I would hazard a guess to say the number's actually much bigger.
So you would say when somebody talks out about suicide, before they act on it, that it's actually it's something that should be applauded. It's a good thing because they're accepting the help and support, and they're admitting to themselves that they need that help and support. Is that what you're trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is that when someone talks about suicidal thoughts, there is hope. Because if they truly wanted to end their own life, or they weren't wrestling with the fact that they want to end their own life, then there is now a doorway that we can walk through.
Yeah.
Which could be therapeutic, it could be helpful to the people that we love, our friends, colleagues. Does that land a bit better, do you think?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess as a counterpoint to that, and something I'd be curious about is, so obviously you've got the ones that don't reach out and they just do it. How do you get through to them?
Good question. Well, what we need to do is be mindful of the triggers, don't we? So we know that suicidal thoughts increase during stressful life events. We know that things like financial crises, unemployment, it's a big one. If they're engaged in problems with the police, or maybe homelessness, domestic violence is one as well, sexual abuse. So there's a lot of drivers within the equation. And so being there, being supportive to our friends, family, the people that are around us, and being aware of the risk and asking openly about it will help. Now, I know that's taboo, and that's probably a conversation for another day, but asking about suicide is probably one of the last taboos we have. I think, socially we've got a lot of taboos, but talking about suicide does have a very knee-jerk reaction in people. If I would like to leave listeners, because I want to bring it back to men's health in a minute, but if I want to leave listeners or viewers with anything with regard to this particular section about suicide, it's this. Your not going to increase the risk of suicide by asking. It's a commonly held myth, and one that I've had stand-up arguments with delegates on my course about.
Yeah.
You're not going to increase the risk. What you might have is a little bit of awkwardness. A little bit of, no, why would you ask such a thing? I feel personally it's better to have that awkwardness for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, and then get over it than it is to not ask and regret it forever because you wish you had, and then the person took action to end their own life. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, completely. And then if they turn around and say no, I guess at least At least
At least it's out in the air, At least it's put out in the air. You got an affirmative yes or no.
I think I was going to say, I think as well, just to add to what you were saying earlier about people not wanting to talk about suicide, I think it just goes back to a general point of not wanting to talk about death. I think as humans, we've done a very, I wouldn't even say it's a good job, but we've done a job of putting this barrier up between us as people and talking openly about death. We struggle with talking about death in all walks of life. So I wouldn't say it's just applicable to suicide. I think it's a general problem of people need to be more understanding and I wouldn't even say accepting of it, but just understanding of death as a concept and being more comfortable talking about it, because it happens to everyone, but you want it to happen at the right time. You don't want someone to get taken before their time. And that's what you're trying to do when you talk to someone who's suicidal. You're trying to make sure that they go at the right time and not before their time. So that's just something that I would add. I think we need to be more comfortable about talking about death. And I know that sounds morbid, but it's a point. And I think it's a very valid point.
Well, they say, don't they, that what characterizes humans from animals is that we are acutely aware of our own mortality. And I think that could lead us to paralyzing fear, and it does for many people. But we could perhaps take Tom's point of view and embrace it to live a meaningful, productive, happy life. The fact that it will end can be a driver to push us towards the concept of happiness or fulfillment, or lead a good life that leaves more behind you than there was when you came in.
Yeah. And I don't think anyone should feel bad about the fact that it's terrifying either, because it is terrifying to think about it. Of course it is, because it's, it could be the end forever, which is why it's more important to talk about it if these things come up, to make sure that that person gets to live their life to the fullest.
So one of the questions, if we loop back now to men's mental health, one of the questions I get asked often is mental health different for a man? Is depression different for a man? Is anxiety different for a man? And the scientific answer, the clinical answer is no. But there is a set of symptoms that men are more likely to experience. And it might give us a little peek into why the rates of suicide and alcoholism are higher in men than in women, who have a higher rate of anxiety and depression being diagnosed. And these very generally include more frequent reports of irritability, sudden outbursts of anger, loss of control, risk-taking, and aggression. So these symptoms, this cluster of emotions or symptoms, however we want to term it, are more common in men who live with depression than women. And so the one that I think is worth picking out most there is loss of control, risk-taking, and aggression. That might give us an insight, a window perhaps, to begin to sort of move in a direction of understanding this problem of male suicide.
I mean, but basically what you've just said are three predeterminants to someone who could potentially commit suicide, right?
Yeah.
Three.
I was going to talk to you. I'm just about to talk to you about language, and it's not to be language police or thought police or anything like that. It's more to do with just how we express these things, and it's not calling you out by any means because it's a commonly held misconception. When people commit something, what normally is it?
A crime.
It's a crime, right? Yeah. And suicide is no longer a crime. It might feel to many like a moral crime, or a crime against nature. That conversation is another one to be had away. But the driver here is trying to normalize thoughts of suicide, attempts and completions. As hard as it is, sometimes people don't want to be here. And it's not a crime anymore. So we're talking about completed, we're talking about took one's own life. These are the turns of phrase which are slightly less judgmental, perhaps, and make it easier and more normal for us to discuss it and have conversations around and about it. It's not to point a finger at you, because everybody does it. Everybody. But it is one of the key elements of adjusting our language. You know, I am not suggesting that what you've said is anywhere near in the same ballpark as calling someone a wacko or a schizo or a freak. But language matters. And so when we talk about suicide, it's a good idea to step out of this concept of commit. But I did interrupt you, and I am sorry, and I would like you to finish your thought because I have a sense that it was an important one to make.
No, what I said was pretty conclusive, but I will follow up that statement by saying we're keeping that in because I think that was a great little educational back and forth. Everyone, even if they mean well, might say certain things in a certain way and not actually understand the underlying meaning behind it. So I think it kind of proves 2 points in that there is a language that needs to be normalized, and if somebody says commit suicide, then it doesn't necessarily mean that there's someone who is awful or has no understanding of it. They just need to be taught properly the way to convey the message. They might be a perfectly nice person underneath, because there's a lot of people on the internet who hear things like that and they immediately think that, you know, you're part of the problem. But I think this is kind of proof of the pudding that there are plenty of people out there who are part of the solution. They just need a bit of guidance.
Thank you.
What do you think of that?
Perfect. Keep as much of that in as you can.
Yeah, I think that was a really good little educational bit. Like you taught me something there, and it also proves that people who say those things are not all bad people. It was great. It was great. So after that little educational back and forth, I think we'll go into the second topic of the discussion, which is a little bit about creative burnout and implications on people's mental health. There was an article in Forbes recently, which me and Chris have talked about, talking about how 93% of managers have been basically watching as mental health negatively affects their bottom line. And I think this links into a wider discussion just about mental health in jobs in general, especially creative fields. Coming from a creative field myself, and the fact that me and Chris are working on one right now, I think we can talk quite openly about the difficulties one might have sometimes from a mental health perspective on that, because obviously this is a new podcast and we're doing it as a side project of our full-time jobs. And, you know, full disclosure, sometimes it's not easy. And I think Chris will go into that himself.
I will. And I think there's two things to discuss here. There's the individual, and then there's the micro point of view, and then there's the macro point of view. So from an organizational point of view. So Forbes were talking about the impact of mental health on the bottom line. And what better way to get businesses or leaders or managers to take notice than for it to affect the bottom line. Of course, it's been affecting the bottom line for the longest time. I can pull up all manner of statistics and numbers for you. But I think what we need to do is drill down on the conversation. It's a fair point, I think, to say that a lot of businesses are taking mental health more seriously. The well-being of their workforce is becoming more important. But as we discussed when we were examining the Naomi Osaka circumstance, it seems to come with a caveat that as long as it doesn't affect the bottom line, but now it's inescapable. Forbes are talking about it. They're saying that organizations, businesses need to step up, and managers are watching as it all evaporates underneath them. So that's where we can go really with the organizational point of view. It is one of the highest drivers of sickness absence now in the UK, stress, anxiety, depression. It's the highest, if not one of the highest, then the highest. And of course, lots of organizations have got really good things implemented, like it's called an EAP or Employment Advisory Program. A lot of businesses bring these in for their staff. Free counseling, limited up to a certain number of sessions, free advice line, free legal support. This is part of the whole equation. Financial advice, this is all part of the equation that makes up employee well-being. So these are the types of things that people are doing, but still it's not enough. And the pandemic, they're helpful. They are helpful. I've fully signed up card carrier member. I have used it before myself for all sorts, but I'm make that clear. But where was I? So what we've got is the pandemic has seemingly eroded a large proportion of the workforce's sense of well-being, sense of control over circumstances. And so it is beginning to hit the bottom line. And I am aware that lots of organizations are now striving towards having things like mental health first aid, having well-being workshops. I was talking to a friend not that long ago who works for one of the big banks about the well-being package that they're offering to staff now and how the adjustments are coming into play to improve people's well-being. So I think there is good steps that are being taken there. And as dismal as the news is from Forbes, it can also be encouraging that, okay, let's wake up, let's take notice, let's begin to move in a direction that is good for the individual, as well as the organization, as well as the business.
I think I was just about to say that. It's worth noting that the study was done by Verizon during the pandemic. So I think obviously you have to look at it in a certain mindset of the fact that quite a lot of this may be as a result of the pandemic. But at the same time, you have to think about the fact that the pandemic has brought a lot of this stuff to light as well. And I think we've seen a lot of organizations now focusing more on health and well-being during the pandemic, and offering a lot of services to help people in those situations, probably way more than they did before. I mean, I've noticed it where I work. I mean, it's probably different for me since my job is in healthcare. It's in a healthcare field anyway. So you would probably expect that sort of behavior, but I know I've seen it a lot in a lot of private organizations as well. So I think if you're going to take like a glass half full attitude, it's kind of bringing a lot of these issues to the light as well, even if it is very difficult for people at the moment.
I think that nicely brings us on to the difficulties that people experience in this concept of creative burnout. And I can speak a little bit, not with much authority. Wouldn't consider myself a creative by any means.
You are, Chris. You are. Give yourself credit.
But I'm reminded of a conversation I had with someone about a year ago, and I was contacted by a business owner on LinkedIn. And they were trying to have me, or they were beginning negotiations with me to come on board to their business. And they offered me equity. They offered me equity in a business to come on board. And I never met this person before, but that got my interest. Okay, well, let's discuss this. Let's, chew the numbers, consider the metrics, etc. See whether this is a worthwhile venture for me to be a part of. But in the discussion,
they weren't selling you snake oil.
No.
It was a proper deal, because I'm sure some people who watch this will think that. So
I've followed the person since then. They're doing great stuff.
Yeah. So it was legit.
They're doing great stuff.
It was legit, people.
100% legit. I mean, they're hiring now. If anyone's interested, drop us an email. I'll tell you who they are, but I just don't want to air them out, really. Because I don't want this to be a negative. But what struck me about what they were saying was that their approach to business is similar to a startup. And I'll say, okay, I hear a lot of talk about businesses being agile and being close to a startup and this startup culture. And I've been pondering what that means for the longest time. And we have spoken in the last episode about Sanctus, which is a startup type orientated mental health business. And I guess that this person was spinning out from that. Not that they worked at Sanctus, don't get me wrong. But they were building on this whole, let's provide mental health to startups as well as other businesses. Now, I don't really do any work with startups, but I've been pondering this for a while. And the founder of Sanctus has spoken about the effects of startup culture on employee mental well-being. And so, I mean, I'm not coming from a point of view that has got no background information. It's out there. People are talking about it. And I did make a post on LinkedIn last week as well about the concept of hustle culture, startup. I mean, these were the words that were being used to me by the person that was, offering me equity in their company. They were saying it's like a startup. If you're into the hustle and bustle, you're into the unsocial hours.
Startup crunch.
You. And I was like, yeah, know what? I'm not.
Yeah.
Actually, I will consider it from a financial point of view, but I'm going to need boundaries. I am going to definitely need, I've got children. I'm not taking calls from you at Sunday, 9:00. It's just not happening. All right. So while I think that making busy is important, and I've definitely been guilty of this over the past few weeks when it comes to what we do with this entity that we have called Mind Games. Progress in itself, just making busy, is never, ever, ever going to lead to fulfillment for you. I mean, this whole concept of being addicted to the hustle of, completing tasks and getting stuff done can lead you down a road of thinking that you're achieving and striving and getting stuff done. But in reality, you're just making busy. I mean, you can make money all you like. That's great. And I understand it. But if we think about leading a fulfilling life, if we're following on from the conversation about death and mortality and staring that down the sort of looking it in the eyes and really approaching it, there's a well-trodden phrase at the moment that no one looks back on their deathbed and says, do you know what? I wish I spent more time at work. And we have to bear that in mind. There is this startup culture. It's a lot of young people that are getting involved with it, especially tech professionals. It can be exciting. It can be what you want. It can make you rich, but also, does it lead to a fulfilling life? I don't know. I mean, my personal philosophy is make your life better by helping other people. That's what I try and do. I don't do anything work-wise, business-wise for free. I'm not going around providing charity stuff. I get paid for what I do. And that is the approach that I like to take. Make other people's life better, but also make mine better. And try and that's, I think all I'll say about that before we move on to creativity. But that was a bit of a rant. Have you got a point of view here, Tom?
I think that is spot on. And there's probably one bit that I'll add to that at the end, right? Which is, why would you work all of your life if you don't spend time to actually enjoy it as well? Because it's something that I've always thought is, I think it's healthy to have aspirations. It's healthy to want a career. It's healthy to have dreams. But if you spend all your time working, you're not getting where's the fruits of the labor? The whole point of working is to enjoy yourself outside of work as well. So if you're just working 24/7, then where's the enjoyment in actual living life coming from? Because you're just working. So you shouldn't work. You should work to live. You shouldn't live to work, I think is what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. And so to loop back onto what the topic of creative burnout, to consider this, to look at this. I mean, you kindly say that I've got, some creative bones in my body. So, and I've examined this as well, especially when it comes to sort of what can I put out there on social media? What can I say that will help other people? And we were having a back and forth just earlier on today about a post that I put up that's, a little bit scary for me to do. And the place that this stuff comes from, really is when I'm not trying hard to be creative. So I don't sort of enforce it. And I think Austin Kleon has written really good, lucid books about things like the artist's journey and showing your work and getting behind the scenes of these sort of things. But the more I aim and make creativity in and of itself a target, the more burnt out in that respect that one gets, I think. And the more it gets missed. But creativity and happiness as a topic can't necessarily be chased. It kind of springs and ensues from doing good work. You can set up yourself where creativity and happiness is a side effect of your dedication to something else.
Yeah.
You probably speak a lot more lucidly than this about me being a creative by profession. But I think if we give ourselves over to something that's bigger, then like creativity is a byproduct of it. And that feels like it's a limitless well. If you surrender over to the process of it what do you think?
I think, well, from a mental health perspective, I think the problem with creativity now in of itself is that it has become a product. It's just a way to sell things now, more than it used to be. Creativity used to be a form of kind of personal enjoyment. It just used to be something to kind of relax. You would do some painting or draw or anything like that. But now, with the advent of social media, technology, the internet, everything, there's a market for everything and there's a product for everything. And we're constantly being told through the medium of all this technology that we use on a daily basis that we have to constantly be pushing ourselves and putting ourselves out there and putting our product out there and trying to make money and trying to make ourselves better and better and better and better. So if you're a creative person, suddenly you're not doing it for fun. You're doing it because you want to make something of it. And then it becomes a business. Then it becomes, how can I monetize it? Then it becomes, how can I sell it? Then you start having to meet targets. And before you know it, it's not creativity anymore. It's a job. And then it saps it all away. And I think that's a problem with creative people in general now, is that we see so much amazing work on the internet. We really do. It's like, it's in the palm of your hand. You can go on Instagram, you can see people doing the most incredible art, the most incredible drawings, the most incredible 3D design work and programming insane things. Like, there's some geniuses out there. And it all goes back to you as the user thinking, wow, I should be doing that. And then suddenly you want to do that, but then creatively you might not be good enough to do that. Like, you just might not be, and that's fine. Like, we're not all geniuses. We're not all at the top of our game. And like, it's normal. And I've kind of had to deal with that myself, because I consider what I do good. I don't consider myself someone who could go and work at, Nike or Google or Facebook at like the top level of their campaigns doing insane work. I'm fine with that. Like, you should be fine with that. If you constantly drive yourself to the absolute limit of what you can do, then you will burn out. Because creatively, I think everyone has we all have like a barrier of our skill level. And yeah, you can train and you might get beyond that, but some people are just not going to attain that level, and that's okay. And I think it's an acceptance thing again of just not letting it bother you, and just like going through that motion and just being like, you know what, I'm not going to let it bother me. I'm going to enjoy what I can do, and I'm going to enjoy being creative. And that's my rant over, but that's what I think.
Excellent. I liken it to, you probably have had experiences of this when you were coming to terms with your condition, with the challenges you have with pain. But I liken it similarly, the war of creativity, if you make it a war, is very similar to when you just don't want to go out. Have you ever had that when you go out and you really try and force yourself to have a good time? It kind of sucks.
Yeah,
and
many times.
You know what I mean, don't you?
Yeah.
And so what if people are struggling with creativity, if people are struggling with, you know, having stress on their shoulders as a result of trying to force creativity, making it become a war, you can probably advise them better than me, but what I would suggest is just quiet it all down, turn the volume down on these expectations and this war element, and just sit with your thoughts and let yourself kind of be guided to the best of your capacity. And then hopefully in the long run, and I mean the long run because like genius doesn't spring from nowhere, but hopefully in the long run, you will have creativity, just like happiness comes as a byproduct.
That's such a good way of putting it. Like I couldn't have said it better myself, you know, and what you said about forcing creativity. If you're getting to a point where you're forcing it, then you need to take a step back and you need to start enjoying it again, because that's when you're at your peak, is when you're enjoying what you do. So don't do it as a job. If you're doing it as a job, always remember to not treat it as a job. And if it suddenly feels like it's becoming a job, that's when it's a problem. So I think that brings us to the very last point, which after that big discussion about creativity, which is, and I think it leads on actually, a lot of people feel empty these days. And it was a study that was recently done by a website called The Conversation. So The Conversation spoke to 400 people, and basically the majority of them 18 to 80 years old. So it was a very, very broad age spectrum. And the majority of them reported that they feel empty at some point in their lives. And I don't know what you'll say about this, Chris, because I think it's quite an ambiguous statement, is feeling empty. So I wonder how you would digest that.
I'm not sure if I could do better than the article did itself about what emptiness is. I wonder if we can drop it in the show notes or something, but you sent it to me on WhatsApp and I found it on my computer by searching The Conversation, mental health emptiness, something like that.
Yeah.
You could use that search phrase to see if you can find it. So I can't really express any better than how it was in the article about what emptiness is. And I think their survey sounds like it was fairly well built in order to capture what the concept of emptiness means to people. But I can't help shaking the feeling that something along the lines of mindfulness could help here. I mean, for me, meditation, mindfulness has been about a re-education of my brain for life. It helps me drop into where I am. There's some sort of sense of it pointing towards a dissolution or dissolving of the barriers between me and everything else. That's how it sort of helps for me. It's the dissolving of the individual from the whole. And I think that, I mean, it is tragic, there's no doubt. And as long as you are separate from everybody else, as long as you are the subject of the story, everything else is external. And you will be moved by the external things. I liken it to whether one exists on the waves of life, as a piece of driftwood being thrown around on a surf, or whether one is an island. I'm undecided yet whether one is an island and life moves around you. It affects you, but it never moves the island, does it really? Or if we are meant to be surfers, surfing the waves of life. I'm undecided yet, and I'd be interested in what your point of view is.
There's some good little analogies, I've got to say.
Thank you.
I will read a quote quickly, just from the article, which just kind of articulates what I'm going to say. So this was what one person said, because they were asked to contribute their feelings. So one person said, "It felt as though I wasn't fully part of the world. I couldn't feel anything, and nothing I did made an impact on events or other people. I existed, but I wasn't alive." I mean, that's pretty dark, I would say, but I think it leads to an underlying issue that a lot of people have at some point in their life with existentialism. Mm-hmm. And I think existentialism is completely normal. I think everyone probably goes through it at some point in their life. So I would be asking the question to these people more of not whether feeling empty at some point in your life is a bad thing, but whether you're able to get through it. Because I think most people will feel empty at some point, but it's whether you know, that adversity to advantage thing that you've said in the past, whether you can take that and get through it.
I think the best thing, well, there's a few things to unpack following that quote, and it is impactful, and it does make you feel such strong empathy towards the person that said it. I think it's worthy of exploration with a medical professional when someone feels that empty, that disconnect from oneself, from the whole. And if I was talking to this person and I was trying to formulate some sort of plan, I think the first step would be to, okay, let's refocus on the individual. Let's drop in to oneself. And I think I would be saying, Google John Kabat-Zinn body scan. What you'll find on YouTube or on Google, will probably link you to the videos, is some great 15-minute or half an hour body scan meditations, which are essentially dropping into the physical body. There's a concept, if I'm not getting it wrong, called proprioception, where you feel your body. So what's the word I'm looking for now? The body scan meditation, yeah. Drop in to your body and let's just be for a while and feel your feet, feel your legs. This is where your attention is. Put your attention in your left shoulder. Put your attention in your right shoulder. See, feels better maybe? Then once we've reconnected with the self, with the internal, reconnected with the body, with the physical presence in the world, maybe then we can begin to work on connecting with the external world in a different way. And so rather than having this sense of emptiness, we now have a bit more of a sense of, hopefully, wholeness after a practice like this. It's not going to be the magic pill that cures all. It's going to take practice. It's a regular daily practice. That's what this is all about. And once we reconnect with the body, we become aware of the breath. And then we can reconnect, hopefully, and begin to experience ourselves as part of a larger whole. Does that make any sense?
Well, yeah, you're trying to get them to understand their own physical presence first before they understand everything else, right?
Yes, exactly. So while it may well seem that meditation is the prescription for all ills, because I talk about it so much, it's only through regular clinical practice and practice oneself that I have found this as a method, as a reliable way of therapeutically helping people. Remember, my position in the whole equation is I'm not dispensing medicine. I'm not a GP. I'm not prescribing antidepressants. I'm not prescribing really courses I'm not referring people to the NHS for treatment, therapy, psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral. That's not my equation. I'm more of a advisor. It's in my job title, occupational health advisor. Here's my advice. I mean, there are other things which I'm sure we'll talk about, things like the concept of journaling. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about sleep hygiene and how to get better sleep along the way. But yeah, it does feel like meditation is something that I do talk an awful lot about. Because it comes naturally, because it feels like the most natural way of existing in reality to me, I think.
But I've got one last question then before we jump to the Q&A.
Okay.
Because I have to ask it, I'm curious. Why do you think that people struggle so much with the concept of the fact that we are here on this planet? There's probably not a reason for our existence, and we should just enjoy the time that we've got here instead of having to search and try so hard to find meaning in our life.
I'm not sure I agree that life is meaningless. I think we can place meaning on our life and inhabit it with meaning. That is the whole
I agree
concept.
with that. I think that's great. Good. Yeah.
I don't think we're like having a contradiction in terms in that case. So to answer the question about why people feel empty and why people feel that their life is meaningless, I would say the answer is most likely because we're perpetually distracted by things that tell us they are meaningful, when in reality, a lot of them are meaningless.
Beautiful. I could not agree more. People are trying so hard to put meaning into things that are meaningless, and it makes them feel meaningless because of it. Could not agree more. When really you've got a whole life to enjoy. All right. So on that note, end of discussion. And we're going to move on to the Q&A. That was quite a big one, Chris. Pretty deep. But yeah, we'll be right back in a minute with the Q&A section. Looking forward to it. We've got a couple this week.
Q&A.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. And thank you for joining us for today's Q&A section. And we have a couple of questions. Chris is going to lead with the first one.
So the question comes from someone that we'll call Frustrated V, shall we, for now?
Yeah.
To preserve anonymity wherever possible. But I think they're asking for a point of view rather than any sort of medical or legal advice. But the question essentially comes down to, if X, Y, or Z happens, you should leave your employer. That's the topic for discussion.
Good question.
It is, isn't it? I think this speaks to things like toxic workplaces and bullying and harassment and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's really broad. And I think some specifics would be helpful. But really broadly, I think when employment starts to affect your health, it's time to start looking. And I would never, ever recommend that anyone leaps out of employment without a safety net to catch them, whether that's parents, whether that's a bag of money, whether that's another job to go to, whatever it takes to preserve security. But I crave security over almost all other things. Security is number one for me. I've got a family, I've got a house, stuff like that, But I would say, if these problems are, X, Y, Z, whatever they are, X, Y, Z, whatever they are, if they're insurmountable issues and you've tried, probably time to look for another job. And there's lots of places at the moment hiring because of lockdown. Lots of people left, lots of places shut down, but now they are reopening and there's lots of places hiring, and you could probably get very competitive with your pay. You might even get a pay rise. Are you with me?
I think.
What do you think, Tom?
This is more something that I want to pose to you, because I think you need to draw the line as well. And I guess this is probably, it's more of an individual perception of where the line is, but where do you draw the line between this is salvageable and okay, it's time to get out and start the process of looking for something else? I don't know if that's unique to the individual. There's been times where I thought my place in an employer was just completely unsalvageable, and I was wrong. Time helps.
time off probably helps even more.
To reflect.
But to reflect. So, I mean, what I'm talking about there is sickness absence, isn't it? But, or just, sickness absence, I suppose. But the passage of time will help put things in context or make an unlivable circumstance perhaps easier to manage. And I think if you've given it the best shot you can, then time to start looking for another place, another position, another job, I think. The thing I would add, though, is sometimes these circumstances can be rich learning opportunities, provided your safety is accounted for.
Yeah.
And I guess when it gets to the point where you're thinking about leaving for whatever reason, there is a threat to safety or a threat to your security somewhere. But difficult circumstances are perhaps another conversation for another day. I don't want to sort of muddy the message or cloud the message about when things just become intolerable, taking action to conclude that, that window of your life and move on.
Yeah, because I guess the mental health discussion is not about what's actually going on that makes it intolerable, is it? It's about getting through that and turning it into a positive, right? That's the conversation that you should be having. You shouldn't be dwelling on the bad stuff.
Yeah, it's very easy to do so when you feel like you are a victim of something. It's easy to dwell on the bad stuff rather than what new skills or new attributes is this experience guiding me to in order to deal with someone like this, or deal with a circumstance like this, or deal with an employer like this. It's a tricky one, really. But, like I said at the start, it's a very broad topic for conversation. I think it's rich, can be richly mined, if you like, for a point of view.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I say, it is because it's very... It's something that you can offer advice on from a retrospective approach, looking into it. But a lot of that sort of thing does come down to the individual and the situation that they're in, and it's usually unique to them. But I don't think everyone has the same broad kind of experience with stuff like that, where you can just apply some sort of basic approach that will work.
Yeah, there is no follow this path, ABC, if what is happening to you is XYZ. Really, I don't think, because, then enters into things like notice periods, contracts, things like that. You've got all of this stuff going on. But I think it would be remiss of me half the time as an occupational health advisor not to bring that into the equation sometimes. And I seem to remember that we did that a little bit as well. It's like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. Well, what do you want to do? I want to be a cinematographer or content, multimedia content node. And look at you now, right?
Basically just finding out if someone is, if that job is the right thing for them. If it's just the place that they're in that moment that is making them unhappy, rather than the actual job. Yeah.
There's something in there about playing the cards you're dealt as well. Because I would say I was rather unhappy with my jobs in the past. And I've been able to find a way. I've been able to find a way through sort of persistence, skills development, and more persistence, just making the thing my own and forging away, really, I think. So there's something about using these opportunities and using what comes at you, because you didn't get the promotion. Okay. The next 5 years that you've got mapped out in your mind has just gone up in smoke. You thought you were standing on rock, but now you're sinking through, in the depths of the ocean. You're deep now. And your whole sort of career plan seems to have gone up the spout.
I think it's worth saying as well that, like, even if you jump even if you start the process of getting out and you do get somewhere, which I guess you could say is your dream job or whatever, it might not always be a case of the grass is greener on the other side. And even if you do get into that job, it still might not fix everything. There might be other parts of your life that you then realize were affecting you as well. And it might not give you complete fulfillment, and you still need a long-term vision for your career. Even if you go into your dream career, you still need a vision for it. You still need to know where you're going, because that drive and that ambition will keep you going. If you just jump into that dream career mindlessly as an escape, it's not really going to fix the problem either.
Are you talking about when someone's in love with the idea of the job rather than being in love with the actual work?
Yeah, I think that's a good that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was in love with the idea of being an artist. But when I actually started trying to make that happen, it became starkly clear that the job of being an artist is not just making the art. It's an awful lot of other stuff. Nowadays, it's even harder.
Admin
You've got to
as
be
well.
a social media. What's that?
Admin. There's loads of admin these days, just promoting yourself.
I know, even just at the fundamental level, you've got to keep your archives. You've got to keep your records. You've got to keep a record of what you used on which painting and all of that stuff. Plus, on top of that, you've got to be a social media manager.
Yeah.
On top of that, you've got to manage logistics, storage, packing, postage.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not good at any of those things. So there went that dream.
But I think if we're going to give some advice to V, I mean, my advice would just be to start the process. If it's that, if you feel like you've reached an impasse where you don't think, where it's not repairable, and I think that's really up to the individual to decide that. And hopefully they've gone through the proper avenues and the proper ways for help at the organization, like going to people like you, Chris, and they've had the conversations. If they've come to the conclusion that they need to move on, then they need to start that process, because no one's going to start it for you.
Correct. And I would like to show my colours of being a hip hop fan just for a moment. There's a great rapper. Some of you might know him as Mos Def. Others might know him as Yasin Bey more recently. But he's got a great line that's always stuck with me from one of his songs. And I should know the name, but I can't remember it right now. But it goes along the lines of, it's easy and hard to be here. It's easy and hard to be here. And I think that speaks to a lot of people's work circumstances. It's easy to just keep turning up and going to the same place and doing the same thing and putting up with the same stuff.
That's a really good line. And I'm not a massive Mos Def fan, to be honest.
Thank you. It's hard to be here because of what you're going through, V. But it's also, pretty easy to just keep turning up. You've been doing it for years. So take Tom's advice, is what I would say there.
Hopefully V takes something from that.
Yeah.
And I just hope that, I hope either the job that he's in gets better and he finds his place there, or that he takes the steps he needs to find something that he really enjoys.
Yeah, if today was helpful at all, and you go on and find another job. I mean, V's a friend of mine, so I'm sure I'll be talking to them again, but drop a line to the podcast and let us know how things are going. Yeah, that would be nice. So do we have any other Q&As?
I've got a question. It's an interesting question from my kind of buddy Sam. Say no
Shout
more.
out Sam. Big up Sam.
First names only. So obviously there's been somewhat of a scandal recently, which we're not going to talk about the scandal, but with a certain health minister in the UK. Obviously, we're not going to go into detail about that because that's everywhere. But he raised an interesting question, which is just about extramarital affairs in the media, how they're portrayed, and the mental health implications that can have on the people involved. And not even, I think what he was trying to get at is that even if these people are even if they were guilty of having an affair, for example, what are the mental health pressures that being in the limelight can put on two people in a situation like that? And is it actually healthy? Is it bad that the media can vilify people so much for things like this? And I think I said it to you before we started recording this, which was some of these things. We're not talking about what's happened recently because obviously there's footage, but for some people, there's not even any proof that it's happened. And it's almost the case of, like I said, guilty until proven innocent. And that's the thing with the media in a lot of ways, not necessarily just, extramarital affairs that come into the limelight. There's a lot of situations where it's kind of guilty until proven innocent. And I think that mentality from a mental health perspective can be really damaging to people.
Yeah. So, what we're talking about here really, isn't it, is public profile people having private lives. Is that?
Yeah. I think it is. I think it's broad. It's broader, and like you say, it's the overarching topic of just being in the limelight.
Well, we've got a few examples, really, haven't we, of people trying to lead private lives in the public eye. Amy Winehouse comes to mind. And everyone would pick apart her partners, and it does seem to happen, doesn't it? These sort of who's dating who, titillating gossip. It's interesting for people. People want to know about that sort of stuff, and it comes with Harry and Meghan's marriage as well. People are all interested in that sort of stuff. And so it's pretty stark, the effect that has on people's behavior and people's mental health, the ones involved. Because Harry moved away and Amy Winehouse died of overdose, didn't she?
Yeah.
Of course, other people mine it for fame to keep it going. I think it's really well documented by someone, I don't want to be judgmental, but someone like Kim Kardashian, who initially got famous and maintained fame off the back of not just her personality, but also the things that she did and, the life that she led. And wasn't she in some TV show where they found her a husband and then she married him and then they divorced? And that was, monetizing your private life, perhaps.
I didn't even know that. So that's news
boundaries,
to me.
Well, I might be wrong. Maybe it was somebody else. And I'm entirely open to the fact that I might be wrong on that because I don't care about it that much.
Yeah.
But what was I going to say?
That's what I would say is that should we care about this stuff?
Well, I think it's easy to close, what's the phrase? Close the cart door after the horse is bolted. These boundaries have been eroded. The boundaries have already gone. So now everyone wants to know. And then you have these really intensely private people. I'm trying to think of one though. So who's been in the public eye and has traded off their fame to a certain extent when it comes to their private life, someone like Brad Pitt or Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie, but then later in life, they've completely closed down and become, I think, rather more sort of private about their private life. So there's that element to it. But when it comes to politicians, which is what we're really talking about, isn't it? There is, I think, an argument out there, because I've been following it a little bit. There is an argument out there that this is for the public record because it's associated. There's some, sleazy stuff, money and contracts. I don't know enough about it and the laws, really, to be honest. But what I will say is my wife told me there's cumulatively six children involved in this whole equation. I think that's really tragic. There's a poor woman who was found out through the Sun newspaper. Not everyone can say that. Through the Sun newspaper that their husband's having an affair. That would be devastating. And there's another husband on the other side who's found out the same thing. I mean, presumably there was a phone call the night before going, is there anything you'd like to say before we publish this story? But I mean, it would be devastating for the other parties. And of course, Matt Hancock and is it Chloe? That they'll be devastated, but
I mean, Kurt Cobain was someone who was who did not want to be, he was very private and he did not deal with the limelight well. And he made it very clear in his book that he did not deal with the limelight well. And I think that was probably one of the reasons that led to what happened, was that he was a very private person who was thrust into a public space. And I think he had a lot of mental health battles with it all as well. I mean, putting aside the chronic pain that he suffered with and the other things, I think he very much struggled with fame and the idea of being in the limelight and the constant attention. And that led to suicide.
Yeah, he's such an interesting cat. He's got a real complexity to his character, because if I'm not wrong, he was on a TV show, which I used to watch when I was a kid, called The Word, when he announced his relationship with Courtney Love. And he said that she was the best screw in the world or something like that. And he was with somebody else. So, I mean, that is attention grabbing. That is headline grabbing. That is fame. And so he's playing with something there. And he always was playing with, media perception and news and stuff like that. Look at the Reading performance. I think it was Reading when he came out in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Well, you've seen that. You might not have been there. You might not have remembered it.
No, but I've read about it. I've never actually Googled that performance.
Great. Like blistering, like amazing. Because there were lots of rumors that he'd had an overdose and that he wasn't going to turn up and he was crippled or so negatively affected by it. He'll never be the same again. And I wonder how much of that was, stoking the fire, poking the bear, putting the stuff out there. So I think in reality, he played with it. I mean, his biography, if you delve into it, he talks a lot about how it talks a lot about how he used to play the media off for the benefit of the band. But I think that's him trying to push the agenda of the art rather than him as a personality. So I think I agree with you in that sense, that for him, the art and his art was the most important part of that. And he didn't really sign up to be this media personality. But I think now, like, look at the struggles in the 90s that David Beckham had until he had media training. You need to have some of this stuff if you're going to be in the public eye these days, because what was David Beckham famous for?
Football.
Initially, he was a footballer.
Yeah.
He was really good at football. But he wasn't allowed to just be really good at football. He also had to be a public figure.
Yeah.
So I think when we're looking at what's going on at the moment with politics and this politician and the circumstances around here, I think when you become a member of the cabinet, you must walk in with your eyes wide open that you are now a public figure. You're entitled to a private life. Like, I didn't know who his wife was until this weekend.
Do you think there's an element then of because I think it ties in with mental health, when celebrities and public figures, when they pursue these careers and they go into the limelight, not necessarily the limelight if you're a public figure, but it's part and parcel of the job. Should you expect to lose some of your private life because that is the career path that you have chosen? Or do you think that regardless, we should all be entitled to it? Because I think that is a question that I have wondered for a lot of celebrities. Are they entitled to it? They kind of know what they signed up for, but at the same time, I don't think anyone shouldn't be allowed some level of privacy, because you need that to be healthy.
I think that's a really good debate. And what I would say while I'm letting that percolate through, I think, is a great interview with Jim Carrey has taken place and has sort of rearisen more recent, in the last sort of decade or so. But it took place pre-fame. And he was talking about what he wanted out of life. He's going, I want 50 million. I've got a check in my pocket that I'm going to cash for myself that's got 100 million written on it or something like this. I want to be able to walk down the street with everybody recognizing me and following me everywhere I go. Won't that be great? And then he does this sort of wry smile to the camera and you think, this is, he's fully aware of the self-destruction that this could potentially bring. And of course, you can see from his career, he's gone through ups and downs, and he's really struggled with his personal identity with some of the movies that he's made. He struggled with being pigeonholed. So he went off and tried to do some horror and real serious acting pieces. And looped back, and now he's a painter. But I think there is an element, isn't there, that you're describing there about signing up. You know what you're getting into. You're signing up for it. You're having a sort of unwritten contract with the general public that they are going to be interested, not just in your art, not just in your work that you do, but also your private life. And when we see this with Chris Pratt, he married a comedian as well, or an actor as well.
I think it's Anna Faris, was it not?
Yeah, and now he's with someone else who I think is Kennedy or Schwarzenegger or something. So, I mean, people get famous, and people are interested in their private life. There is one of those really famous actors who's quite private, I think. Chris Evans, Captain America. I think he's quite private. He doesn't put his private life out there. But then on the same token, the other Chris in the equation from Marvel, Hemsworth, he posts pictures of his family and his kids, and his wife comes with him to, movie premieres. He's living that life in the more of the public eye, sharing the fact that he's a dad.
Daniel Day-Lewis is a very private actor.
There you go. There's the extreme opposite. Why would you possibly care about my life and what I get up to beyond my art? And he would. I mean, I can't think of a time where I've ever seen him share any element of his life beyond the art, the work. But
he's one of the best actors alive at the same time.
The best.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you on that. I'd agree. He is the best. Yep.
Do you think that answers the question?
I think it does. I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole for hours on that. You really could, and you probably just arrive at the start, because I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. And I think it's best to just compromise and say what we said, which is, they probably are entitled to some privacy. But at the same time, if you go into these positions and you go into these places of work, you can't not say that you know what you're signing up for. Because you do. You know what you're getting in for.
And I think some general good advice is much easier to set and maintain boundaries than it is to work back and reinstate boundaries once they've been eroded.
The problem isn't necessarily the public eye and the fame and constantly being in the media that I think affects people. I think it's more the age that you go into it. I think I think a lot of people who seem to get into fame and the public eye at a later age seem to deal with that sort of stuff better than someone who has grown up with it and been through it their entire life from being very young. Because I think you see it in a different perspective if you get into that, thrust into that at a later age when you're more mature versus if you're just carried through it. Especially from a mental health perspective as well. Because you're not learning normal life when you're going through it as a child and straight into an adult as well. It's probably very hard to know what reality is actually like and living normal is like, because you've never really known it. And I think that you see a lot of young celebrities who just, once they start getting older, especially to their late teens or early 20s, they do go off the rails. And I think that is more of an issue from a kind of mental health perspective than the actual fame itself, the age that you go into it.
Imagine if you went off the rails and you were hammered and you decided to drive your car, and then the police pulled you over and arrested you, and you're absolutely hammered, and it's so out of character for you, it's not the type of thing that you would do. And then you got a mugshot. Would you be grinning in the mugshot like Justin Bieber did? I wouldn't. my pants would be filled. I'd be in so much trouble. I'd like be so worried about, my life and what's going on. But he grins down the camera. And, I think that speaks to a disconnect from reality. And, you could argue there's lack of consequences for the rich as well.
Yeah.
But regardless, if you've got a Scrooge McDuck like fortune in your vault, unless you're separated from that, which is unlikely to be in this day and age if you can pay people off. And the consequences are really unlikely to be too severe for you. Yeah, I think we'll find out what happens with, someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, won't we? We'll find out what the consequence for a rich person really is quite soon.
But would you say, just your opinion, that age is a contributor then for that sort of stuff?
Yeah. I think if you haven't fully formed your character and suddenly you're getting lots of adulation, and that adulation can be, flipped on the turn of a dime, unless you're a pretty robust person psychologically, that's going to affect you one way or another. But, as an older man engaging with something like that, I'm sure it would be a lot easier for me to have perspective than it would be if I was, a teenager again and still hadn't fully formed my psychology, my relationships, my people skills, my capacity to feel. It's very confusing growing up anyway. Add into that, what's the right word? I want to say fickle nature of fame and public persona.
Well, I mean, it just makes me think of Nadia Whittome that we talked about in the last one.
There we go.
In a way, which is 23 years old, thrown into Parliament. She probably didn't realize what it was actually going to be like when she got there. It was probably quite a shock, I imagine. And if she already had these health issues that she was suffering with beforehand, it's gonna make it very difficult, and they're probably going to surface again.
Still can't believe she's an MP at 23. It's remarkable, isn't it?
It's amazing, but at the same time, it's got to be scary for her. But congratulations for doing it. I mean, it's still an amazing achievement.
Yeah. I mean, where next?
Yeah.
What is next for her? I mean, what's the next level above that?
That was a very long discussion. Thank you for that, Sam. We probably didn't answer your question at all, but we had a nice conversation.
Try a different recipe of words, Sam, if we didn't get there. But thank you. Big up, Sam.
And I think that's it for the Q&A section, actually. We've had our 2 questions. Quite a long chat, actually, for the Q&A this week. So that was good. And we're going to move on to the last section now, which is the in-clinic. And we've got an interesting topic to talk about. So we'll just scoot over to there and you can join us in a minute.
In clinic.
So welcome back. Welcome to the In Clinic section of the podcast. This is where Chris plays the leading role because he's the professional and I'm the colour. I like that phrase. I'm going to coin that. Colour commentary. For those who like wrestling, I'm the colour.
Brilliant.
So we're going to start this with a little bit about the previous episode because it kind of ties in with that. So obviously in the last one we talked about Nadia Whittome, we talked about Naomi Osaka, and these people who basically have faced a lot of stigma due to the mental health issues that they are struggling with in their careers. And that was an example, I think, and I think Chris agrees, of kind of bad stigma that happens and not good practice. But we wanted to look at the flip side because it's only fair, and we want to position ourselves as obviously a fairly neutral podcast that always tackles both conversations. So I got talking to Chris on WhatsApp and I was just like, well, if you're a manager in an organization, it must be sometimes quite difficult to know when an employer is genuinely unwell versus when they might be lying, because I'm sure it does happen. And although I was one of those people who was unwell, there's probably a lot of people who do try to take the mickey a bit. So my question to Chris was, what do you do about that? If you're a manager, if you're a company, like where do you draw the line, and how do you discern between the genuine people who are unwell and the ones who are not?
So I think what we can speak about is my point of view on what to do when a manager has got someone with a health condition that they don't know what it is, haven't asked, or feel they shouldn't ask. I think the boundaries of this conversation, though, also need to be, to a certain extent, like the HR policies, practices, and the legal stuff, the employment law stuff. So it comes down to how do we determine what's legitimate and what's not. And you can only really do that with a proper health assessment. So hopefully the individual is going to agree to a health assessment. What I would say in terms of my subjective experience over 11 years of being an occupational health advisor, qualified occupational health advisor, it would be that it's very rare that I meet someone who's not legitimately unwell in clinic. On the rare occasions when it has happened, it's normally people who just need to make some lifestyle adjustments. There is no underlying health condition contributing to this sickness absence or performance dip, however we're going to, be engaging with the person on that level. However, there is some lifestyle issues going on. So that might be staying up too late. That might be socializing too much and not coming into work because just have a duvet day. Just can't be bothered really. And I have had someone look me in the face and say, I don't come in sometimes because I just can't be bothered because I'm up too late talking on social media with my friends. And my friends are important.
I suppose you have identified the problem there. Social media, right? So you identified the problem, I imagine.
Yeah. But I mean, that is not at the moment, to my knowledge, a health condition in that equation. That's a lifestyle issue that needs adjustment. And it's not going to come from me with any reasonable adjustments other than just, sort it out. Because I don't want to see you back in here again.
Yeah.
Pretty much, we'll be going round in circles with this if you don't make some changes. And I'll keep seeing you for the same thing and I'll keep saying the same stuff back, that you're perfectly healthy. So when it comes to, for a manager, so here's my big headline broad advice when it comes to a manager and whether they're dealing with a legitimate health condition or not, don't judge. It's not your job to judge. Your job is to get the work done, to manage the person. And you might need outside advice. So my advice is always to managers, don't operate in a vacuum. Never, ever, ever operate in a vacuum. You are responsible for the person's health and safety, but does not mean that you do not reach out and get advice from professionals, whether that is advice from the human resources department about what to do, about what policies and procedures are associated with performance management, or whether you reach out to someone like an occupational health advisor to get advice on if there's any underlying health condition that needs adjustments in order for the person to do their job. So never operate in a vacuum is the big main message I want to leave you with. And that really, I think, answers the question as best as I can in the way it's been posed. But is there another element? Is there another need for opening up that stuff, Tom?
Well, I can ask something on the back of that, which is...
Go for it.
Can the manager... Because you talk about they shouldn't be in a vacuum and they should reach out to the resources that are available to make sure to, get that person the help they need. Can the manager make a decision on that employee without going to these services?
Yeah, of course they can. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They will probably run into some difficulty later if they did that.
That seems like bad practice to me. Would that be an example of bad practice if they didn't reach out to occupational health and attempt to get adjustments and...
Yeah, or HR and get some advice about performance management. Yes, all of those things would be bad practice. It's best to engage with the professionals on the level of what they're good at as it relates to your employer rather than make a knee-jerk reaction or impose whatever sanctions that you might have in your imagination right now, Tom, and forge ahead nonetheless. Because if you're not following the procedures, you're not engaging with the experts on the matter, then you will run. I think you're going to definitely run into some problems either with the organization or externally if it hits, a court of law, I would say.
I guess off the back of that, I would ask about the manager themselves, because I think obviously they've got all these resources available. And again, you're talking about them not being in a vacuum, but how does a manager make a decision such as that? Like, you're talking about they should not make any judgment. Is that what you're saying? They should just keep a completely neutral, just take a step back and let the resources deal with that person.
Good question. So their decision would be informed by all the information and all the support that they get from with the organization. So when I say don't operate in a vacuum, I don't mean just devolve responsibility to everybody else. Not at all. Not at all. The manager still has responsibility, and then the manager's got a manager above them, of course. So, we're talking about medium to large organizations here that have got policies, procedures, different departments for different things. Yeah. Not a startup that's, got some dysfunctional founder who's just telling everyone they're fired. It's
probably not even got a HR department.
Exactly. So the decision will be informed by the advice from HR, occupational health, etc. That's for clarity. That's what I mean there. And then the decision could be performance management. The decision could be termination of employment in extreme cases, things like this. So, does that answer the question?
It does, but it brings up something else now. So I guess I'm firing things at you, but I guess this goes a little bit back to what V was saying as well in the Q&A. And he never explicitly said it, but you could definitely tie it in, which is employer bias. And you say about being non-judgmental, but I think, and I've experienced it, it's very hard to be non-biased in those situations. And let's say you've got a manager who you don't get along well with, and how can they make an informed decision when there's that implicit bias going on?
It took me years to figure it out. Years. But so much of being in work with organizations is people skills and rapport. You're absolutely right. If you don't get on with your line manager, your work is going to be harder. Add into a unseen, chronic, underlying health condition of unspecific origin, and you've got a real headache on your hands, I think, there as well, Tom. Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't know if that's at all anywhere near an answer to the question there. But we've got to begin to equip not just managers. Managers need them a lot, but not just managers, but people with people skills, employees. How do you manage your manager? All of that. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I agree. To be honest, I didn't really expect there to be a concrete answer to that, because I don't think there's one myself. So I think it's one of those situations that's really difficult to, there's not a process that you can put in place for it, is there? If you don't get on well with your line manager or the person who is putting the report together.
Yeah, there's things putting the medical report together, you can ask for another occupational health advisor, I suppose, a different HR advisor. You've got to follow procedures when it comes to employee relations or grievance or performance management. But beyond that, there's not much else that can be done, yeah.
But have you ever experienced anyone in your clinic who has openly said to you that they have relationship problems with their management?
All the time.
Really?
All the time. So much. In fact, so much so that I'm more often sort of pleasantly surprised when they say, my manager's great, so supportive. Most of the time, it's just like, my manager is there. A lot of the time, it's don't get on, there's an issue. And sometimes it's, my manager's great. And that's across the board in many organizations, I think.
I would say, why am I not surprised? Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I don't know, because you've been alive for a while, you've gone into work, and I think one of the core issues here, actually, Tom, if we speak broadly, I think one of the main issues, just quickly before we have to wrap it up, is that people are promoted based on their performance, not their people skills. Okay, so if you're really good at accounting, you end up managing people that do accounting. That doesn't seem logical, does it? Why don't you just let that person who's excellent at accounting develop their skills at accounting more? Why does being really good at accounting things, at being an accountant, suddenly make you equipped to manage people? Now, of course, with that would come management courses and training and things like that to become a good manager. But I think there's a need here, and of course, there's a bottom line argument against it. There's a need here for people managers and performance managers within the same department. Someone who does the people stuff, the motivation, the performance reviews, someone who is looking at the metrics, and somewhere in the middle they meet and the team gets the benefit of both sides. I think there's a need for that in our world today, because as we were talking about earlier on, like 25% of managers receive training about how to deal with mental health issues. That's not enough.
It's a really
That's
good
not
point.
enough, because guess what? All managers, 100% of managers are responsible for their staff's mental health, like it or not. It's enshrined in the Health and Safety at Work Act.
It doesn't take much to send managers on a mental health first aid course either.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's great if you've got it in-house. It's great if you've got it in-house and you've got trainers in-house that can deliver that stuff. But also, it really doesn't take too much, like you say, to organize it. And as a provider of that training, I will say that my services are available.
I set you up for that one.
And I laid it up, didn't I?
I think that's a great point, and I think it's a good place to kind of slowly wind into the conclusion, which is, what you just said about the lack of, just people getting promoted based on their work and not on their actual people skills, because I can count the number of good managers I've had throughout my career on one hand. On two fingers, and I've had quite a few. And why were they good? Because they had people skills, because they could communicate, because they were relatable, and they didn't just treat you like another cog in the machine. And I think that there should be more of a focus when someone is getting promoted on not just their performance, but how they would actually function as a manager of a team. And would there, like, if you put them in charge of a group of staff, are they a good person to manage a group of staff? Because some people, like, and it's not nice to say it, but they're just not good. They're just not good people to manage people. And that might be because, like you say, they need to go on more training to help improve that and make that better. But then if that fails, then I'm sorry, maybe you're just not fit to be a manager, because the amount of damage that you can do to your staff if you are not a good manager is huge.
Ray Dalio talks about this really lucidly. Ray Dalio is a billionaire investor and trader, and his book Principles, Life and Work, obviously the book is like cut right down the middle, the life stuff and the work stuff, but he talks about how he structured his organization to enable people to be good managers and to have functional ways of raising issues with poor line managers, because he found that, he was making hundreds of millions when things were not working well. So he fine-tuned that machine and then began to make billions, along, of course, with all the other improvements that he made in terms of his trading and things like this. But I find it perhaps interesting for people who are interested in that specific point of what Tom's talking about, Ray Dalio principles, life and work. Lots of really good stuff about people management and systems around people management that are effective for him. And
that was a financial organization.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't remember the name of his trading firm, but it was, he's made ungodly amounts of money in the.
But they're pretty notorious for the grind.
They are.
So that's impressive. Like that's good that a financial organization went and did that.
Worth a look. He also has an app. I mean, I think he's in a stage of life now where he wants to give back to the world and be like, right, I've taken so much, and this is the benefit of my experience, and here's how I run my company. And it was really good for us. Maybe it can work for you guys as well. So he's got the app, he's got the book. I'm sure he'll be having a course or something like that. I mean, he doesn't need to do this stuff. He could be on a yacht somewhere, but this is what floats his boat, I suppose. This is what tickles his pickles. So yeah, great guy to follow on social for these type of things. Yeah.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Would you agree?
Thank you.
I think
absolutely.
we've concluded it on a nice little high note of a financial company that actually treats its staff well. So on that note, that's it for today, everybody. A massive thanks to everyone who tuned into this episode of the Mind Games podcast, episode 2 of the full format. We hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed making it. As always, we urge you to please like and or subscribe if you want to hear more. We release these every fortnight on a Monday, and if you have any questions, you want to reach out, or you just need some advice, feel free to submit anything you have to our email address at askmindgamesuk@gmail.com with the subject heading Mind Games Question, so that we can find it easier, so that we can help you. And we endeavour to answer as many of these as possible, but obviously if we get a lot, we might not be able to answer them all. But as you heard, we had a good chat on the 2 that we got this week, so we encourage you to send as many as you want at the moment. And that's it for this week. So I'd once again like to thank my amazing co-presenter Chris for being my awesome co-host, and we'll catch you on the next one.